You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today. But before we do, gotta thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They're been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma. And it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. A huge shout out to Governor Anatoby for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. And finally, our third sponsor is 988. The Oklahoma 988 Mental Health Lifeline. 988 is a direct 3-digit lifeline that connects you with trained behavioral health professionals that can get all Oklahomans the help that they need. Learn more by visiting 988oklahoma.com. That's 988oklahoma.com. And now, let's get into today's episode. My guest today is Chef Shannon Smith at Chef Shannon Smith on Instagram and chefshannon.com. I'll put the links below. You can go check that out. But I am a terrible cook. I stay as far away from the kitchen as possible. My George Foreman is my best friend. That's about the extent of my cooking career and a microwave. So I'm really excited to dive into learning today about, all the stuff that you do. You seem to have traveled a lot. Clearly you cook a lot and you host events and everything is around food. But before we dive into that thing, tell me a little bit about you. Tell me about your history, your background, and growing up in Tulsa.
Well, I'm excited to be on today because I love Oklahoma. And since that's what this podcast is about, I've lived in Oklahoma my entire life. But right now I'm traveling probably 40% of the year. I've been to 52 countries, many of them multiple times, and I love coming back to the state of Oklahoma. I live in Tulsa, but I grew up in the Oklahoma City area. Went to middle school and high school in Tuttle, which is southwest of Oklahoma City, and had a wonderful life there. My father was an accountant, and his dream was to be a cowboy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So when I was in 7th grade, he and my mother found this ranch out in Tuttle, and it had 180 acres, and he moved my sisters and me out there, and I was a little ranch girl in Tuttle. But one of the highlights of growing up and going to Tuttle High School was my home economics teacher. That was Miss Craig. She was my home ec teacher all 4 years of high school. And I learned a lot from her. My mom was not a great cook. She cooked because she had to. Yeah. And, I grew up on canned food and, casseroles, TV dinners, things like that. And so I didn't really know how to cook that much. I didn't enjoy it. But I learned a lot from this home economics teacher. But what I really loved was sewing. And my mother sewed all my clothes growing up. And so that's what I started doing when I was a little girl, was sewing. And eventually, through the inspiration of my mom and Miss Craig, who I wanted to be when I grew up, I went to college at Oklahoma Christian. It was Oklahoma Christian College at the time. Now it's a university. And got my home economics degree there. And went on to graduate school to study design at Oklahoma State. Yeah. And this was all in sewing, and so cooking was not part of my life at that time. And I moved to Tulsa, married a guy at OSU, moved me to Tulsa. I had never been to Tulsa, and really none of my friends had ever been to Tulsa. It was like another state. And I think it's getting a little better now. But anyway, came to Tulsa and started a sewing business. And I sewed for about 12 years. And my claim to fame on that is I've sewn at least 500 bridesmaids dresses in my lifetime, or in that career, I should say. That was kind of my niche. But it was very hard on me. on my body, on my it was emotionally and very straining. And unfortunately, my marriage was failing at the time. We had two very young children, and so I decided to make a change. Made a lot of changes actually, but one was to change careers, and I got a job here in Tulsa teaching cooking to underprivileged kids at an apartment complex, as well as Catholic Charities had a shelter for unwed mothers, and they asked me to come there and cook also through this nonprofit. And I finally got to become a teacher, which is what I always wanted to do, like Miss Craig. And I love teaching so much, and I loved teaching these kids, but I didn't know much about how to cook very well. I mean, I could teach them, the basics and kind of nutritious meals and how to cook, food from food stamps, which is how they were basically getting their food. So I went to a culinary school here in Tulsa, and for 4 years, I learned everything I could. I got a lot of confidence. I remarried, and that man started taking me around the world traveling. And I loved traveling. I had gone through Oklahoma Christian, I had spent a semester abroad, and that's when I kind of got the travel bug. But it wasn't until 15 years later that I got to go, abroad again with my husband. But after several trips, I felt like I was missing something, because we would go and see all the touristy things, and which was fine. But I had this yearning to meet the people, to actually immerse myself into the culture and learn about these people. And so I decided to do that, to make that part of what my cooking career. So on another trip, and this one was to Italy, I asked my husband if I could take cooking lessons and just do some different things. And I got on the internet, and this was 12 years ago, and I really had to search for people that might teach me. And I found a woman in Rome named Diane Seed. She was an expat from Great Britain, but had been there 40 years, and she taught Italian cooking lessons in her apartment.
Oh, wow.
And she normally did these gourmet tours where she took very small groups to different countries and different places around Italy, and she would teach cooking, kind of on the side. And she was not really particularly interested in teaching me for only one day. That wasn't her thing. She liked to spread it out. But I talked her into it, and we became very good friends. And as a result, I went back many times to Rome to study with her, and I went on a lot of trips with her. And she was a single woman, and she traveled a lot, and it was through her that I gained confidence to travel alone. Yeah. And I started doing a lot of that. And with her, I went to India, Turkey, Morocco, Sri Lanka, Sicily, I can't remember, several other places. But on those trips, I met additional people. And I started getting confidence that I can do this. And so over the past few years, I've been back to Italy probably 25 times, kind of had a similar experience in Bologna, meeting a family there that took me on market tours, taught me a lot just about Bolognese food and the food from that area. I've been back there 3 times. They're like family to me. They've actually come here and stayed with me. But I've done this really all over the world. And then and at the same time, I was teaching cooking here in Tulsa, mostly to adults, to some kids, some homeschooled kids too. But I thought, and this is really over the past 5 years, I thought I can do dinners based on all these places that I've been. And that's what I started doing, are these, I call them experiential dinners, which are they're really pop-ups. And I have a beautiful backyard, so I mostly do them, during the season, cooler weather, and they are all based on a country or a cuisine from where I've cooked. And for example, this week I'm doing a night in Morocco, which is a 6-course dinner with all Moroccan dishes. And I was just there. I've been there twice. I was just there last April, so it's really fresh on my mind. And plus, I bring back ingredients to use in those dinners. So that was a very long answer to how, but that's the very condensed answer too.
Well, there's so much to unpack there too, because like it's growing up in Tuttle, kind of rural, on kind of in that environment, kind of being like I said, growing up like a bit of a farm girl and doing stuff there. It all comes kind of full circle because now you appreciate where the food comes from, right? And all of the kind of the stuff that goes into buying locally, and it all makes sense. But unpacking that stuff, like what, going back to Miss Craig and your love of kind of teaching and her home economics class, and just, now, I'm sure now she'd be extremely proud of you because you're like, yeah, I'm teaching, but you found something you love to do and you love teaching it. But so growing up, you wanted to be creative, and after learning how to sew, you were like, this is my thing. I can be creative and I can go into the sewing. And obviously you ran with that. And 500 bridesmaid dresses is a lot of that's a lot of brides and a lot of bride mothers too to deal with. So where does the entrepreneurial thing come from though? Because you got to be pretty entrepreneurial to be like that. I mean, does that come from mom and dad?
Probably so. But my father did. He owned his own firm. In fact, it was called Merle Hall McIntosh and Company. It was the largest privately owned CPA firm at the time in Oklahoma. And but he was so busy. I didn't see. He was a wonderful father. I had a great childhood, but I didn't see him a lot because he was running his own business. And as a result, I didn't learn a lot from him about business. So I don't know. I've never thought of myself as an entrepreneur, but I guess that is the case.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always worked for myself, really. I'm not particularly good at, the money part of it. I fortunately have a team of people that do that for me.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky that I can do that and just really focus my energy and time on the creative side.
Yeah. That's a true creative, right?
Yeah.
Like an artist. I want to do my creative stuff, and I'll find a team to take care of all the stuff that takes energy from me.
That's true.
I hate numbers and accounting too. Tell me about kind of when you go to OSU as a to go into design at OSU. Well, and at that time, it seems like your passion and your career was, I am going to be a designer. I'm going to go do the sewing thing.
That's true. And so my senior year of my undergrad, I went to, was at Oklahoma Christian. That's when I went to Vienna, Austria for the semester. And had gone, Oklahoma Christian, especially at that time, was extremely strict.
Oh, yeah.
And, I grew up in an extremely strict home, and I was a little bit of a rebel. I was the oldest of 3 daughters, and it was like I was unleashed when I got to go to Europe. Yeah. And so I had a lot of fun and developed an attitude, to be honest, and was like, I'm going back to Oklahoma, I'm getting out of there, I'm going to New York. I was just this real little snot about it. And I'm certainly never going to marry an Oklahoma boy. I was determined that would never happen. But I think once I got home, back on home turf, reality sunk in, and I'm like, okay, let's see what I'm really going to do. And, I chose to go to Oklahoma State really because I didn't know what I was going to do. Yeah. I mean, I graduate with this degree. In the beginning, I wanted to be a home economics teacher. But what happened was by the time I got to the end of college, I had to do a student teaching or whatever. Yeah. And I was put into a school in northern Oklahoma City, and it was a terrible experience. Yeah. It was so terrible. The kids were so disrespectful. They didn't love home ec, and I couldn't understand how you couldn't love home ec. And the teacher didn't love teaching. Yeah. And so I'm stuck in here witnessing this and thought, you know what, if this is what it really is like, you know, I had a great experience and I'm thankful for that. And B, I cannot do this the rest of my life. Yeah. So I dropped the education minor and decided I can't do that. So now what was kind of what happened. And so I chose to go to Oklahoma State, to my parents' dismay, because they went to Oklahoma University. Yeah. But I had a great experience there too. I met, you know, I really said I learned in that year and a half, I learned more academically than I did in 4 years of undergrad. Right. But it was also, again, I was a little unleashed at a state university. And that's, you know, of course, when I met my first husband. And so that's why I went, and really, again, didn't know what it sounded great. I'm going to go to New York and be a designer. Mm-hmm. And of course, I married the Oklahoma boy I swore I would never do. But you know what? Things have worked out.
Things work out for a reason, right? Yeah. All of this stuff happens for a reason.
Right.
And like, that's the beauty of it, is that, you know, when you look back, you're like, timing happens and things happen for a reason. But it's really, you know, looking back, that trip to Vienna really opened your eyes to the rest of the world. And that's one thing why I say this pretty much every other podcast, is like I really want people to travel. You know, I want people to see the rest of the world and get out of their hometown and get out of the state. And, you know, even if it's just, you know, the beauty of this country is it's so big, go to a different state. But if you can go to a place that doesn't speak the same language, you learn so much, right? You also learn how to think on your feet fast. You're in a different country. Like, there's so many benefits to travel. But for you, being at that young age, going to Vienna and being like, I'm away. Like, no one's really, you know, like, I can go do my own thing, you know? And I'm kind of under, like, probably the watchful eye of your parents and peers. And you're like, you know, you don't have that, you know, what if someone sees what I do and tells my parents, kind of growing up, you know, in a quite probably a Christian environment, right? In that environment. And, you know, I went to Southern Nazarene, so I kind of get the total scene of OC and Southern Nazarene. Like, it's you know, you're totally right. Like, you're unlocked at this point. And like, wow, the rest of the world is like this. And I'm not surprised that you had a little bit of an attitude and a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, because you're like, I can do this, right? And you go back to Oklahoma with this world travel experience, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to make something of myself. I want to travel. I want to, and that kind of, clearly that is, you know, centered in your love of travel, going right back to that moment. And
you know, the 10 years that I was married to that man and worked so hard. I mean, I was working 16-hour days, you know, sewing for the very elite of Tulsa. Yeah. You know, as hard as that was, those years really helped develop me. So, you know, you talk about the entrepreneurial aspect of this. If anything, those years, I mean, I grew up on a farm or on a ranch. I grew up working hard. I mean, it was required. And then, you know, now I'm working hard, you know, with as in a sewing business, because it was out of necessity. But those were very formative years for me, because now, you know, many years later, I don't really have to work, to be honest. But I work very, very hard now. It's just in me. Yeah. And so I'm thankful for those years that I sewed, you know, day and night. Yeah. It's ingrained in you, right? And back to what you said about your dad, it's like, look, he was a great dad, but he was also never around because he was working so hard. Right. And again, comes full circle. You totally get it now. I do. At the time, you're like, why isn't dad home? Like, well, he's working. Right. Right. So yeah, there's no doubt that, you know, like what you said sets great context of telling, you know, the story, but tell me about then that decision to go from the design thing into the food business, because, you know, you think you didn't grow up, mom wasn't a great cook, you didn't grow up around, you know, great cuisine and probably adventurous cuisine too. Right. And now you are probably the most adventurous person that I know with their cuisine, right? And you made a business out of it. So tell me about kind of that period in your life where you make that decision to go into, you know, becoming a chef and having that chef title. Well, you know, I think going back to that, when I decided to go to the culinary school here, I did that because by teaching those kids, I learned a very valuable lesson. This was taught in an empty apartment here in Tulsa, and it was state-funded housing. Okay, so these are impoverished kids. Mm-hmm. So half of the complex was blacks, and the other half was Russians. Mm-hmm. And I was told that they didn't get along, which was truth. They didn't necessarily get along for whatever reason. But these kids were told they could go to a cooking class after school and get fed, basically. So, and that was their motivation. They were going to get a good snack. So these kids would come, and I would teach them, and we would, play games and eat. And what I saw was that food brought these kids together. These kids were developing friendships and relationships because of the food and the environment I was providing. And so for me, that was my first really aha moment of food brings people together. Someone once told me it's hard to cuss with your mouth full. And it's the truth. When you are, communing with someone with food, it's hard to have an argument, when you're enjoying a good meal. Mm-hmm. So I think from that, I thought, I want to make this bigger. And I loved teaching these kids. So now I want to teach more kids, and I want to teach adults. And so at the time, I'm teaching these impoverished, I hate to use that word, but that's all I can, underprivileged kids. And then I was teaching these very elite, mostly women that were coming to my home. And so I had a very broad, spectrum of people. And I loved it. And I loved the feedback I was getting. I am a good teacher naturally, and I enjoy it, which is an important part of being good at something. And so that's how it all evolved.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like being a golfer, people say, "Oh, you're good at golf. You should teach me." And I'm like, no, you don't want that to happen. Yeah. I don't want that to happen because I'm not going to enjoy it. And also, you don't want to learn the way that I learn, right? People who teach have a gift. And most of the time, it's natural. You have to have some natural ability. But back to your point, you have to want to give and pour into kids. And the thing, I was on a couple of years ago, I did the regional food bank kind of young professional board, which is like a year-long thing. And I was shocked to know that the stats around food and the food poverty, right? Like some of these kids, and it's so simple. It's food, right? Yeah. We don't think of this stuff, but just the education around food. And one of the comments that we'd had, and we met every month and did this class, and like some of the kids who'd grown up didn't know the difference. They thought that they're I think it was like peaches. They thought that their peach came from a can. Yeah. And like that broke my heart. I'm like, you need to try fresh peaches. And I think they'd given away, and the kid was like, "What is this?" Like, "Oh, it's a peach." "Oh, well, no, my peaches come from a can." And just that, like the stuff that we're generally not aware of, but for these families and these kids growing up, that's their life. And just like the benefits of food and like. That's why COVID was so bad, because these kids couldn't go to school to get food, and it's heartbreaking. And thankfully, the Regional Food Bank and other charities are doing great things to make that a difference. And obviously, you got tied in with one to go and help these, teach people how to cook. Because I was fortunate. I didn't learn how to cook, but my mum she was a trained chef, which probably ruined my cooking experience for the future, because I didn't have to cook because she was so good at it. But at the same time, she knew what she was doing, right? And I used to have some idea, but it's such a privilege to for them, but also for you to give back and to have that experience, and also have that context of like, I'm teaching elite Tulsa families how to cook, but then the next day you're down there teaching these kids how to cook, and probably doing more, building more of like, you're probably happier teaching these kids than you are probably teaching these housewives or whoever.
And that is true. Yeah. And with that, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, lead into some of the microfinance work that I've done with the same thing, teaching underprivileged, mostly women. My husband, who's now an ex-husband, wrote 2 books on microfinance, which is a banking program that gives small loans to people in impoverished countries, mostly third world countries. And these are people that want to start their own business, but they don't have the capital. And so these banks give these loans to, and it's mostly women that try to get these loans. And the payback rate is very, very high because of the accountability and many other factors. So it's a very successful program. So he had written these 2 books, and we were supporting a lot of these programs around the world. So I knew about it. I knew how it worked. But at the time, I was raising young children, so that was all I had to do with it. Once my children graduated high school, I felt this urge to become more involved. By that time, my husband had moved on to other things, and really it wasn't, a big part of our lives at the time. So I thought, I want to go meet these women and teach them cooking. And so the first trip that I did was to Dominican Republic. Actually, the first trip I did was to Rwanda. And I went as part of a group of microfinance donors, I guess, to kind of watch and see how it works. And it was very powerfully effective for me. I really, I was so impressed, and I thought, how can I help with this? So there was an organization that works with microfinance in Dominican Republic, and I emailed them and said, I would like to, actually I want to send a check, a donation, and I would like you to purchase sewing machines for women that want to learn to sew as a business. And they wrote me back and said, thank you very much. We would love to have your check, but we would prefer or would love for you to come and teach them how to sew on these sewing machines. Well, this was 10 years past when I'd quit sewing.
Yeah.
And teaching sewing and teaching cooking are 2 different things. Teaching sewing is probably like golf. I mean, it's very difficult to teach. I don't enjoy teaching it. I had been out of the business 10 years. So I write back and I said, thank you very much, but I don't teach sewing. I'm a cooking teacher. Well, so I get an email back that said, that's fantastic. You can teach both. And I'm thinking, well, I think this is a sign I need to do this. So I agreed to go. And, my friends donated a lot of fabrics. We put together these kits and all this. I took huge suitcases with me to Dominican Republic. And for people that if you've ever been to the DR, there's these lush, wonderful hotels on the beach. It's very glamorous. But what most people don't realize is that just feet behind those places they have no electricity, no running water, and they are extremely poor. And that's where I was in these villages. And my goal was to teach them how to cook the foods they grow or that they can get in their market. I'm not going to go in and try to teach them Moroccan food, and plus I speak no Spanish and they speak no English. So I had an interpreter or a translator, and I spent, about a week. In the mornings I would teach cooking lessons, and then at night or in the afternoons I taught sewing. And when I showed up, they had purchased 10 sewing machines, and these were treadle machines, so they didn't require electricity. They were set up outside under a tin roof, and I show up and there are 30 women to 10 machines. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? I don't really like to teach. This is going to be hard. And, I don't speak the language. And there's 30 of them, 10 machines. So I thought, you know what? Most of these women are going to go home without a sewing machine. They belong to the organization. What's the point, unless they can get a job working with a sewing machine, what's the point of teaching them how to use the machine? So I pull out a needle and thread, and I'm like, I'm going to teach you how to sew by hand. And by the end of the week, they'd made a coin purse, a tote bag, and forgot something else. A pot holder with, all the fabrics that I brought. I took a bunch of decorative buttons. And it was a wonderful experience. I probably got more out of it than they did, which is, a typical response. But Easter was coming up in about 2 weeks, and they had all gotten together and decided they wanted to save their coin purses and tote bags to take to church Easter Sunday as kind of a celebration of that week. And I mean, I was elated over that, and I loved it. So I went home and was asked a year later to come back to a different part of the island. Mm-hmm. So now I kind of know what to expect. So I asked the facilitator through the email, I said, when you meet these women, because I knew she would meet them at their loan meetings, would you ask them if there's something in particular they'd like to learn to cook? And she did, and she came back and she said they want to learn to make Italian food. And I'm thinking, well, how do they know what Italian food is? And what am I going to teach them that they have there? I'm not going to teach them how to make dried pasta if they can't get dried pasta. Right. So not knowing really what they had, I decided, I knew that they did grow potatoes. Okay. So I thought, I'm going to teach them to make gnocchi. Uh-huh. And then I'll teach them to make sauce with the food they grow, because they, grow beautiful food there. Uh-huh. So once I was there, I taught 90 people how to make gnocchi, and we made 3 different sauces. We made one that was similar to a pesto, only we used cilantro and the herbs that they had there. In fact, they had never seen basil, and I had purchased some basil in one of the markets near their village and taken it with me. And they were so fascinated by basil that I was taking the leaves off and kind of demonstrating what I was making, and tossing the stems in this pile. They had told me to put all my excess food, stems and things like that, in this pile to feed the pig. Mm-hmm. And so I was just kind of tossing them over there, and I see these women coming over and grabbing the stems. And so I asked the translator, I said, what are they doing? And she went and asked, and she said they want to root them and grow them in the garden.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And so that's what they were doing. It's just, going through and finding that. So that was very eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
And, so I have done it there. I've done it in Rwanda. I have a real heart for Rwanda. There's a school in Rwanda that I support, and I've gone and taught the cooks at the school, how to cook for Americans is what because they have so many Americans that come over to help work at the school, but these cooks don't know how to feed them. Mm-hmm. And these youth groups and school groups are coming, and they're teenagers, and they don't want to eat boiled pumpkin, 3 times a week, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So I would go and I taught them how to make chocolate chip cookies, because they have the ingredients, and they grow this beautiful food in Rwanda, but they didn't know you could make pumpkin pancake. It for granted. Mm-hmm. The foods that we have, and especially in Rwanda, they work so hard, these people, and they don't have time to learn a different way to do something. They don't even think about that. Yeah. And so it's fun for them too to take a sweet potato and do something different than just boiling it and eating it.
Yeah, definitely. And so you go doing this, you're giving back, you're traveling, you find your passion, right? And then I guess you're thinking, I can't go to Rwanda every week, right? I've got to, come home and bring this back home and do stuff here. So where do we kind of get to? Tell me about the time you first hosted an event then and cooked for people here in Tulsa.
I can't remember the first time, because I've always been an entertainer. Okay. I love to throw dinner parties. Sure. I can't remember the first time that I actually charged money for it.
Right.
But the response I have gotten over the years has been so positive, and my dinners sell out within a couple of hours, and which is very encouraging to me.
Yes.
It's a unique experience because it's at a home.
Mm-hmm.
I live right in the middle of Tulsa, so you don't have to go, an hour out of town to a farm or
Yeah.
something like that, which, we have those here, and they're wonderful experiences. But I think I offer something a little more convenient. You just come right here, and I'm telling stories. I have so many stories about the people I've met around the world, and the way that I learned, different dishes. So I tell those stories between courses.
Mm-hmm.
And everything. I'm a storyteller, and
Yeah.
every dish has a story, and that's just something that I think is unique, and people don't.
Right.
Not everyone can do that.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, kind of when you were going through your story at the start, was that you kind of first time you traveled on your own, it gave you the confidence to travel more, and then that again unlocked the rest of the world.
Right.
And with food, I mean, there's incredible cuisine at every country. So. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about kind of what gave you the confidence to travel, and not everyone who goes to Paris is like going to get taken and Liam Neeson's going to come and save you. Like, you can see the rest of the world. It's generally safer than the media and everyone else says it is. So tell me about kind of traveling and finding that confidence, and then again unlocking that to going to what did you say, Morocco, India, Turkey, and some of those great other places.
That's a great question, because that's something I like to, I like to talk about, and I like to tell people that it is generally safe to travel, and it's even alone. I mean, as a single, white American woman going into a Muslim country, or to Mexico City, which I've been to, 3 or 4 times this year, and people warned me it's not safe, you can't go. That's garbage. Every city has dangerous locations, has dangerous people. Now, some are more dangerous than others. There are places I won't go.
Yeah.
But overall, it is, do your research ahead of time. I mean, I've never been in or felt endangered. I do. I carry myself well, and I think that's important. You got to make good choices. You can't go, don't go out at night to sketchy areas. But traveling alone, I often meet friends, so I may be traveling alone, but I may meet up with friends, from other places. Or I might take a friend for part of the trip or something like that. The other thing is I have guides. And that's, for example, in India. I'm not just going to show up in India and get in a taxi and say, take me somewhere. I do plan ahead, and I hire guides to show me around. I've met a wonderful guide in Mexico this year, and I've been back 3 times with him that takes me around. And the other thing is I make friendships very easily, and I've learned how to talk. I know how to talk to people.
Sure.
I ask a lot of questions. I'm a very curious person. And, people from other cultures find that intriguing. They love that I care enough to ask questions, and that I want to be their friend. And I tell you, it's been very beneficial to me because I have a lot of contacts around the world.
Yeah.
We're still friends. They send me their mother's recipes for things, or they say, come on over, my mom's going to teach you how to cook. I mean, it happens all the time to me. And I think I just that's another gift I have is friendships. So, it's funny, recently someone asked me, what is, we can talk in a little bit. I am writing a book, which has been the most difficult thing I've ever done. But someone asked, what's the second book going to be?
Yeah.
And I said, there's not going to be a second book. No,
it's all going into this one.
I'm over that.
Yeah.
And she said, Shannon, imagine there's a second book. What's the title? What is the title of your second book?
Yeah.
And it came so quickly to me. I said it would be a children's book, and it would be titled How to Make Friends.
Yeah.
because I think I know how to do that.
Right.
And I think children need to know how to do that
Yeah,
at a
for
young
sure.
age. So
Yeah, it goes back to, I mean, everything you just said, right? It goes back to building relationships, but also the one thing I loved that you said was, you know, you're generally curious, right? But that also comes from the passion that you have for cooking, because you're eager to learn and you want to learn, because you have this passion and this kind of, you know, love for cooking, which also centers back to building friends, because then you get to host people and build more friendships, and it's just this amazing circle that works out. But it comes from you genuinely caring and having proper interest in what they're
Right.
doing, which most people, you know, especially I think coming from an American, right? When American travels, you know, a cliche American, I'm saying here, just a general American, they don't ask questions. They say, I want this because I get this back home. I know I'm going to eat steak somewhere, right? And they order steak and fries or whatever. They very rarely does the average typical American who travels try the local cuisine. Whereas you come from a, how do you make that? Like, that tastes incredible. Like, I want to learn how to make that. And then you learn all this process. And then you come back here and teach it to people here.
that's true.
Which is
and,
awesome.
and it goes even further than that. They tell me, you know, my mother taught me to make this. Well, tell me about your mother.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, similar to what you know how to interview people. I don't know that I know how to interview, but I genuinely care. I want to know. I want to hear about your mother, and then I get some other story, and then I get another recipe, it's almost. I'm not going to say it's like a game, but I just figured it out.
Yeah. So with the travel thing, then you said 52 countries. Two questions. What was the country that surprised you the most, and then what country's next on your list that you haven't been to yet?
That surprised me most. You know, one was Israel. I've been there 5 times, and the first 2 times, you know, I went with a biblical historical tours, which was all fine and good, and it was interesting and educational. But you know, I found myself, you know, staring at the breakfast buffet in the hotel, which was actually phenomenal. All these fresh vegetables, and the whole time I'm thinking, I want to know about this food. Who made this?
Yeah.
Where did this come? How did they get this ingredient? What is that little berry? You know, I'm thinking this, and I'm, you know, sneaking off and asking questions to the, you know, the waitresses and things, which I love to talk. I love when I go into a restaurant, even the fanciest restaurants. I like to talk with the staff. You know, that's where
they
you
know
learn
everything.
stuff.
Yeah.
And so on my 3rd trip to Israel, I actually spent most of my time in Tel Aviv, and which most people don't. You know, all these, you know, biblical or historic. They don't. They land in Tel Aviv and then they go straight to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But I tell people, go 2 or 3 days early and hang out in Tel Aviv. It's completely different. It's very, you know, modern city, and the food scene is incredible. And I've made some great friends in Tel Aviv. In fact, one is coming next month, and we are doing an Israeli dinner together next month with this guy. But I would say, and then I mean, it was so great. I went back 2 more times, and have been all around, including Jerusalem. So now I've also been in Jerusalem for the food scene there, in Nazareth. You know, which, you know, if you know anything about the Bible, you've heard of Nazareth.
Right.
But I've been there and met one of the best chefs I've ever met was in Nazareth, and it's a woman. So that was probably one of the most surprising places.
Yeah. And then which one's next? Where haven't you been that you really want to go to?
Where I have not been, I mean, my bucket list is short. I'll be honest. I mean, if today was my last day on this
You've lived a pretty good life,
I would
right?
say I've done it.
Yeah.
But I want to go to South Africa.
Okay.
I've read a lot about the food scene there, and of course the wine is extraordinary. So that's one place I would really like to go. Someday I want to do an African safari, and I'm talking a really
proper one. Yeah.
Proper one.
Yeah.
I've done some, you know, out in Rwanda, but that would not be food centered. That's just a cultural thing. But It's really short, and there's no place. I want to go back to Australia. I've been there twice, and I really, really loved Australia. But another surprising country I would say is Mexico. I that's the other thing I try to tell people, especially here in Oklahoma. It's so easy to get there. It's so quick. It is safe. Mexico is a massive country, and every little square mile is different from the other. And the food is not what we have here.
It's not Tex-Mex. It's
Right.
actual, authentic, real food. Yeah. It's funny. I interviewed one of a guy who writes. He's a writer for a magazine in Oklahoma City, but he does do food writing as well on the side. And we spent an hour talking about the great Mexican restaurants, the real great Mexican restaurants in Oklahoma City, and he was diving into like even the region, right? Not just the city, but just or the cities, but just like the region and everything it's from. And we had a wonderful chat. It was eye opening for sure. But it's the places where these have the best tacos or the best tamales, and you never heard of these places, or it's the stigma of you shouldn't go down there, or not at night, but it's worth traveling for these this great food. And you get to see it from the region itself, and you get to travel and meet these people, and by having relationships in these places, you probably get the experience that a lot of people generally don't get because they haven't built the relationship that you've built, which is awesome. But tell me a little bit about the book that's coming out. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So my book I've been working on it about 3 years. Well, I've been writing it for 3 years based on many years of experiences, but it is a cookbook and a travel memoir, really, and it's got 12 chapters, and each chapter is centered on a place from where I've been and cooked. And I used to say it's based on a country, but there's one chapter that is Peru, Argentina, and Chile.
Yeah.
I started to call it South America, but then I looked at a map. I'm like, you know what? There are a lot of countries.
There's a lot of countries down there.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
And then another that is not a country. Well, two. One is Caribbean, which again also covers a massive amount of the history of the Caribbean is so fascinating to me. And then Santa Fe, New Mexico, is one chapter because, excuse me, I've been going there my whole life.
Yeah.
And the food there is unique, very unique in itself. So that will be one chapter. But it's going to be a beautiful book. It's called The Hidden Table, based on all the hidden tables that I have dined at, and all, including fire pits and bars and cutting tables and all of. It encompasses a lot of different hidden tables and stories. But the photography is magnificent. We've worked on that for many years and still almost there. We've photographed all the food, all the recipes, which is about 120.
Yeah.
And we're almost there.
It's
hard.
So do we have a deadline on the book? Are you working towards that the book is going to come out at?
My goal is, since I'm self-publishing, it's kind of my own pace.
Which is a good and a bad thing, right?
It's a good and bad thing. But I have three editors that I'm working with, and they are kind of my accountability. But we're working toward the end of this year, which is in 2 months. The manuscript will be finished. Awesome. And, of course, then it goes to designers and all of that. So next fall, I hope to have a book in my hand.
Yeah, and that'll be on the website, chefshannon.com.
It'll be on the website, chefshannon.com. I'm going to do a book tour, around the U.S. and hopefully sell some books that way.
One of the things that I think is a lost art, and you've seen it by traveling, but the thing that it's the fact that like nobody dines for a significant amount of time anymore, right? It's so fast paced. It's like some people don't even sit at the dinner table anymore, and it's one thing that you just, when you go to a restaurant that actually provides that experience, or you come here with you and you put on a show and it's educational based, but you get so many people here and you host and you build an atmosphere. It goes back to what you mentioned earlier about food brings people together. Right, and that just it is about the food the bigger thing is about getting people in a room together, right? And like the relationships you build from that. Food is the vehicle towards that.
That's right.
I wish we could get back to that.
You know, and I love to hear stories about the relationships that have formed at my dinners and at my cooking classes.
Yeah.
There a lot of, business relationships have formed. People have been hired by other people. I'm not sure there have been any dating relationships formed, but I would love to hear if that happened. But it really, it's incredible the friendships that have formed through my dinners. And sometimes they'll come back, the next time together, two women because they met at the previous one. So it's true. Food does bring people together, and I try to make it a very comfortable and welcoming environment here. So that relationships do happen.
Yeah, it's, again, like food is, the amount of people that I've met, like to what you just said, the amount of people you meet at dinner, right? And you've had that experience as someone has hosted a dinner. A friend of mine the other day, I did a podcast with a guy, and he said to me, he's now a friend, and he said, "What are you doing on the weekend?" I said, "Nothing, my wife's out of town." "Great, I'm cooking, come on over." And, and then I'm thrown into this melting pot of like 10 people who I've never met before in my entire life, all different ages, all different kind of backgrounds. He cooked for everybody, and then we went out and had a great night. I'm like, this should happen more often, right? If it wasn't for people, there needs to be more people like him that will just host. Because I think we've lost that, like, people now, like, don't like to host people at their houses, right? They're just like, oh, do I really, I don't want to host. I don't have to clean up. I don't have to deal with people coming to my house because my dogs will go crazy or whatever. But I think they'd have such a better relationship with their friends if they did. Right?
I agree. And I think, or I hope that people are doing it more. Yeah. I don't know. I don't get invited to be, and of course I'm told that people are intimidated to cook for me, which I hate hearing that because it's not about the food. Yeah. But I think younger people are starting to do it. I know I have a daughter that's 28 or 27, and she and her friends get together and cook. Of course, she cooks because I taught her how to do it. But I think it's becoming, a little more trendy. But at the same time, as you know, it is a lot of work. Yeah. And it can be intimidating. But I agree with you. I wish more people would do it. Yeah,
definitely. Finishing up then, what I guess is your kind of, top tips or words of wisdom for people listening that think maybe they've never cooked before in their entire life, they want to get into it, or, I don't know, just what do you tell people?
This is what I tell people. You can learn anything on YouTube. And, even I do it. Sometimes I don't butcher a chicken. I don't cut up a whole chicken that often. But when I do, I have to refresh my memory by going to a YouTube video. And so that's one way to learn how to cook. I know there are a lot of cooking shows out there. I don't watch them because I just don't have the time. But that's one way. But another thing I like to encourage people to do is find a friend that wants to learn to cook too and learn together. Choose one cookbook and say, we're going to cook 10 recipes out of this book, and do it that way. And that way you're learning with someone, or form a little dinner group, and I know people that do that. A lot of couples do that. And each couple brings a dish out of a particular cookbook or a particular cuisine. Yeah. So that's one way. Just it's practice. Like anything else, like golf. Yeah. You're not going to become good at it unless you practice, and you're going to screw up a lot. So just know that. Yeah. YouTube's the greatest resource. It is. Right? It's just, and everyone's got it. It's so easy. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to share some stories. Excited to hear more from listeners that have followed you or got involved. Maybe they'll come to one of your events. For people listening, the link is below to Shannon's website, chefshannon.com, and then go to her Instagram. It'll also be linked below, but at Chef Shannon Smith. You can check out awesome Instagram content. You've got a great following and built a great brand through Instagram as well. And we will catch you next episode. Cheers.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at oklahomahof. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And finally, our third sponsor for today, the Oklahoma 988 Mental Health Lifeline. 988 is the direct 3-digit lifeline that connects you with the trained behavioral health professionals that can get all Oklahomans the help that they need. Learn more by visiting 988oklahoma.com. It's 988oklahoma.com. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.